So
Okay.
welcome everyone to Conscious Communities May 2nd gathering. We're very happy to have all of you here, some of you who will join us later and some of you who will join us through the recording. Just one announcement that I can think of, maybe the rest of you have more, but just want to let you know we're taking the summer off. So we will not be offering first Sunday gatherings in June, July, and August. And then we'll be back in touch with you in September. So today we've been looking forward to this for a long time. We have one of our favorite speakers, Melinda Chichester, who's going to be sharing with us more about her story, her personal story, as well as her passion for all things related to death doulaing. And she will share with us more about what a death doula is for those of you who are unfamiliar. And we just want to find more and more ways in which we can be with people, or ways in which we want to have others be with us when it's our turn, but ways that we can be together at those sacred times, not only of entering this life at birth, but also departing this life at the end. And so, Melinda, please tell us a little bit more about you, and then we really want to hear your story of the work with your father. My father, my greatest teacher. So, blessings, welcome. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you. It's been a while since I've been in community. I have to tell you, it feels good to be back with you guys. And so a little bit more about me. So I am certified as an energy practitioner in healing touch and some advanced energy practices, as well as an end-of-life doula. And my passion is to bring energy medicine to end of life. I've been blessed to be able to offer some pretty unique techniques at the 11th hour. And that's going to be part of the story I share with you today, that I was able to do that with my dad. And so, and I do have the tissue box. It's still a little raw at times. And so kind of hoping I don't, I won't lose it, but I may end up having to expand out of the emotional field to the more mental field. So I have been called to this work as far back as probably, probably around 2008, when I was involved with a local hospice when I was here in Pennsylvania. So I am from Pennsylvania. My entire family lives within a 20-mile radius. There's probably about 30 of us. And so my husband and I were the ones who were venturing away, spent some time in England and Virginia, and of course, Colorado, where I met Marcia and a bunch of others. And so it was in Colorado that I really began to develop as a practitioner and heard about being an end-of-life doula. And I've heard of birth doulas. As a matter of fact, I always wanted to be one, but life took me to end of life. And so I was fortunate enough to meet someone who shared that she was an end-of-life doula, and I mean, a birth doula as well as an end-of-life doula. And in that moment, I knew that I had been called to this vocation. And so I have just been doing everything in my power to learn more about it, to be in the company of those that are dying, or working with hospice patients, and networking with you, Marcia, around conscious living and dying. And so while in Colorado, as I was kind of developing these skills, I always knew in the back that I needed to come back to Pennsylvania, and that's where my roots are. And my parents were aging, and my father aging quicker than my mother. And so I knew it was time for me to come back to Pennsylvania. I thought it was being a daughter and a doula and a daughter. Very challenging to doula your parents. And that's, I guess, what I'm hoping to share with you. Not everyone may have the challenges that I had, but you're going to learn a little bit about who my father was today and why this was such a unique blessing when he gifted me that moment when he passed with me next, by his side. So I guess if it's okay, can I start sharing my story here? All right.
Absolutely.
We're good? All right. And if anyone has a question, please, I love, ping pong, just, bounce, raise your hand, or I don't, were you, if anyone has a question. All right. All right, can you see this okay?
Yes.
All right. So some of you may remember this slide when I presented back in the Conscious Living and Dying when we had the fall gathering quite a few years ago. So this is an image by Sonia Shannon, and she presented for you. And I'm so sorry I missed that. I was actually at a Mind Body Spirit Expo down in Colorado Springs, and Rick and I were wandering around, and next thing you know, I come up, literally almost bump into this image, and every hair on my body stood up, and I said, this is what I'm doing. This is the work that I'm trying to immerse myself in. And so I met Sonia. She's given me permission to use this image, and it really does show how at end of life, we've got to let go of the baggages, the burdens, whatever it is. Now, this is really for those that are transitioning, but I was able to see this same and experience this same release through the work with my dad. And so Sonia, I'm sure she told you she's a digital effects artist, and she'd done she'd worked with Star Trek 3. Did she mention this, Marcia?
I can't remember, but yes, she's definitely worked in the movie world.
Yeah, she's worked in the movie world. And so when I saw this, I was just, all right, I have to have this as part of how I express and share the work that I do as an end-of-life doula and working with those in transition. Okay. And so I really give deep gratitude to Sonia for just, in that synchronistic moment that she was able to, in her artwork, show what I love to do. So I just wanted to show you, this is my father. His name is Ed Fogel, and I just wanted to share there that, this is dad, daughter, doula, and then there was the death. And so there was a lot that I was learning about my relationship with my father, and I was somewhat sad to realize that I had so few pictures of just my dad and I. This was back in August in 2016, and just quite really does show how much I respected my dad, but also was, there was some sadness there as well because of how I grew up. Oh no, hold on, guys. That wasn't supposed to happen yet. Hold on. All right. So the next slide. What was so interesting about the next slide that's coming up is I have a twin sister. Her name is Gail, and she sent this picture to me a few weeks ago, not knowing that I was working on this presentation. And so This was back, I was 6 years old, 7 years old, and this really does sum up my relationship with my father. Every Christmas Eve, my father would read "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." And so he'd gather the family together. And so, I'm not touching it, I swear. Okay. Angelina, I should have had you do this. All right. And so it was tradition that my father would read "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." And that year, I wanted to be the one sitting in front of my father, reading the book, and I was not permitted to be that person that my brother is in my father's eyes, right? As we got older, I eventually started referring to my brother Ted, who is sitting there in front of my dad, as the prodigal son, right? He really could do no wrong with my dad. And so I was really sad that I couldn't be the one to sit on his lap and read "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." And so I just, my sister and I, you'll see Gail kind of towards the back there, twins. And she actually had the brunt of my father's inability to be emotionally available to the girls in the family. And I'll kind of go into that a little later. So what was so interesting is this was a few years ago. And so this was probably the last family picture. And what we noticed between this image and the previous image, and I'm going to go back, is that we are sitting in the exact same order. So that would be myself, Melinda. This is my oldest brother, Ted, my parents, my older brother, Richard, and my twin sister, Gail. And if we go back 50 years ago, we were in the same order. And so my sister and I just had the kind of neatest chuckle that we somehow ended up in that same pattern. And I just kind of wanted to share that, you know, this is us all grown up. So a little bit about my father. So my dad was born in 1933 and he passed in this past January in 2021. And so as I was gathering information for this presentation, I don't think I realized my mom and dad, they had met in 1950 and they had been dating for almost 6 years. They were 17 and 16 when they met. They actually shared a common love of the beach, and that's where they met. They lived in went to different high schools, but they vacationed in the same beach in New Jersey. And so that is how my parents met. And they were married in December of 1955. And then when they were married, my father was in the service in the Army from 1955 to 61. And so as a second lieutenant. And I thought what was so interesting as I'm doing this timeline, they had 4 children in those 4 years, 5 years that my father was in the service. And so they had 4 children under the age of 4. And I think every one of us was in diapers at the time that my mom was raising this family. And so oh, this will be fun as everything's flipping around. And so I needed to kind of go back and really identify my father and who he was. And my dad was very self-involved. He was always around. You could find him under a car, in the garage, right? If you needed dad, you could find him. But he was emotionally unavailable. My dad was not one of those people who was able to articulate how how he was feeling, or he really was challenged relating to the twins in the family. And so over the years, my father really controlled the family and others, especially my mom, with money. That was how my father showed his love, whether or not he helped you with a loan or whether or not he lent you a little money to support you a little bit, right? And so that was how my father expressed his love. And my whole life, I was trying to get my father's attention and approval for just being who I was. And it just was such a challenge. And so I do want to share, my father was a very confident man. He was grounded in who he was. He prepared financially for my parents' retirement and for their entire lives and how they would sequence to where they live now, and that's in a retirement community. And so he provided very well. One of the things that I recognized with my dad as I moved back from Pennsylvania and was trying to support and have that difficult conversation, as we are doulas, or as we walk the journey with somebody who is approaching end of life, we have to have those hard conversations or ask the difficult questions. And my father was one of those people where you could never talk about death. And I was so challenged because he prepared his whole life up until when his physical needs became a challenge. And then there was no discussion, there was no planning. And everything just seemed to stop at this one juncture of their lives. And so that's where I was hoping to come in and share my wisdom and share my knowledge and share, options around what we can do at end of life. But my father was adamant that he wanted to live his life while he was ending his life. And so I wanted to share just this quickie. I am now supporting my mom through her end of life process. And I am literally living the story in this moment with my mom, learning the lessons that I'm ready to let go of. And so I'm at a mother-daughter doula and then death with my mom. And we're having the same issues, right? We don't want to talk about death. And I'll tell you, as a doula, that's really hard. At one point, my mother even looked at me when my father was declining and said to me that you are failing as a doula. I was like, okay, then I guess I just need to be a daughter in this one. And so it was this constant checking where I was, how I was approaching, how do I present myself, how do I hold the container for my mom and dad as they are approaching end of life. So that's going to be my next presentation, mother. So I wanted to share, my lessons through this journey. And so when I moved from Colorado to Pennsylvania, I really thought I was going to parachute right into their lives and be the doula, and they're just going to trust and honor the path that I have been experiencing for the last, 10 years. My doula work certainly for the last 6. I have the experience, I have the information, and there was nothing I could do or say that my parents were willing to listen. It was almost as if my contribution, whatever I was sharing, was just being ignored or just, let's not talk about that. We don't need to talk about that now. And so I learned very quickly that I couldn't doula my parents. And so I had to meet my dad where he was. And it was a real challenge just to get him to go on hospice. And the only reason he agreed to it was because I shared that we could get free equipment, that we could get free help. When it came to the financial aspect, my father was all over it. But unfortunately, my father was never prepared emotionally for end of life. And so I learned quickly that I had to just be a daughter. I had to trust his process. It was his way or it was no way. And that's actually how he lived his life. And I think people will show you at end of life how they live their life. And so my father needed to be in control of every aspect of his surroundings, of the next steps. If it wasn't his idea or if he couldn't comprehend it, it just wasn't a possibility for him. Very frustrating for someone who is seeing what's coming forward, right? As we approach end of life, if we've had experience in that, we know what is ahead of us. And I was trying to prepare my dad and my mother for what was, coming into their into the, the next steps of the journey. And it just was not happening. As a matter of fact, I'm a fire preventer. I want to see what's happening and I want to pull in my resources and I want to prepare for what's next. Because actually that is something my father taught me, right? He always planned. He was expecting things and he made it, not make it happen, but he certainly was prepared for it. And so I felt like I was doing that, or I wanted to be able to offer that for my father as well. And so it clearly was, I want to say he had to shout out often enough that he wanted to focus on his life. And that meant as his world became smaller and more contracted, meaning he couldn't go anywhere. He ended up being wheelchair bound. He needed help with all of his ambulating to and from different locations. He still wanted to control every aspect. As a matter of fact, I remember one day he got so mad at me because I was trying to organize the living space where they slept. And I was moving some things around and he literally sat on the end of his bed with his head down. I know you mean well, but I can't find anything. And my dad collected, I think I found tubes of ointments from 1990, so I'm trying to just help them prepare for what was coming. And so I remember talking to my dad. As a doula, we create legacies, or we can create a legacy. And so I was trying to work with my dad on what his legacy was. And so he shared with me his legacy was to leave mom financially prepared, financially supported, and he wanted to leave an inheritance. And that was his legacy. He didn't want to spend any money. He wanted to save everything that he could possibly save, even to the detriment of his care and actually my mother's care at the end. And so I realized that Dad, as we approach end of life, it is all about our physical decline. And then it reaches a point where the end of life becomes an emotional and a spiritual experience. And my dad was ill prepared for that aspect of the journey. He could not go in and recognize anything that, you know, like the life review, what he could have done different, or what lessons he might have learned, right? My father left this world wanting physical therapy and a heart surgery. And so he never really embraced the fact that he was going to leave, you know, to die and leave. I mean, I think he knew it, but he just wouldn't talk about it. And so I was very blessed at the time when my father was bedbound. At one point I asked my mom if I could do an energy treatment to help ease the anxiety, help with a little bit of the pain that he was suffering from. And my mother's response was, well, if it makes you feel better. And I'm like, okay, I think I'll pass on that one. And so it wasn't until literally my mom and I were alone, and it was the night before he passed, where it was clear that his symptoms were, he was showing us that he was approaching that end of life. And the morning of his death, it was just my mother and I. And I asked Mom if I could do a technique. It's not the technique that just relaxes you. It is literally the technique that I bring to end of life that opens up that channel. We call it the hara. It opens up this channel, which helps with the connection from the physical lifetime that we experience here and the connection to your divine source. My dad was not a spiritual man or a religious man. He didn't go to church. He honestly was left brain engineer. He thought death was pretty finite. As soon as he was gone, he's going to be in the ground and life was over. He didn't know that there would be, he didn't have the knowing that I have seen in my own work, where those that cross over give us messages. We know that there is more to this life than what we are experiencing in this moment. And so that early morning, I said to my mom, you know, are you okay if I give Dad this treatment? And it's going to help show him how to find his way home, because we were at that point now that it was imminent. And so I did this technique, and it was shortly after, just about when I was finishing what we call a chakra spread, which is something that we do to open all of the energy centers to help the body release all that is not serving them as they transition. I often will speak to the soul of that individual and let them know that they can, you know the journey in which that you are traveling, see where you are going, open your heart to the experience, release the need to control, right? Release the need to be in this lifetime. So I would speak to the chakras as I'm doing this technique. And just as I finished, my father took his last breath. And I want to kind of jump to the next screen, because I'm going back to the first image. I literally had the experience of, well, I'm 60. I wouldn't say my traumas started, you know, as an infant, but I certainly recognized very early on that I was screaming for my father's attention, and had done that my whole life. But in that moment of his death, when he took his last breath, it was as if the baggage, right? Now this for me was emotional baggage. It wasn't something that was anything physical for me or spiritual. It literally was the emotional baggage that I held with my dad. And it was not on his perspective. It was only mine. So it was only mine to release. And so I just feel honored that I was able to experience Sonia's image here, because I felt the release of all of those burdens that I have carried for these years. And I do have to share that it was my sister took the brunt of this. My father never was able to connect with my twin sister. I don't even think he liked her. It was horrible how I saw the anguish in my twin throughout our lives. And I had a tenth of the experience of what my sister went through her whole life, being emotionally pushed away or never valued, not appreciated for who she became as a woman and the hard work that she did to build her practice. And so I was able to feel the pain of what my sister had experienced her whole life. And so I am honored that I think what I experienced with my father as he transitioned is he wasn't able to tell me in this lifetime. He couldn't talk about that. But he did bless me with the gift of witnessing his last breath. And it was so peaceful and so gentle. And I think what was the most touching for me is it took many hours to gather the family, to get everything together before they would take my dad away. And every time I came back into that room, I saw the look on my father that he and I shared in that moment, you know. And so it was unique to be able to, like, for 4 hours, I would go back in and see the same expression and have the same kind of release or knowing, like, wow, you know, thanks, Dad, because that was the gift that he couldn't show me in the physical world, but he was able to show me at the end of his life. I think the gratitude that he had, that what I was offering at his end of life journey. And if I may take a drink of water. And so I want to, I just am, I wish it could have happened sooner. I wish it could have been a discussion I could have had with my dad. But I'll tell you, I wouldn't trade it for the world, in the gift that he gave me. And so when I'm working with the dying, I will have conversations, especially if I'm able to while they're living. And I ask them to tell me what symbol they want to show me that they've made it to the other side. And so my dad was an avid golfer. And so he and I talked. I said, okay, Dad, when you get to the other side, I want you to bring me a golf ball. And so I kid you not, I walk my neighborhood, and one day I was walking and found a neighbor who had, I don't know, probably a half a dozen plastic golf balls in his yard. I walk behind my house where it's just an open softball field, a women's softball field, and I'm finding golf balls back there. And so I really do, I don't see a golf ball now that I don't feel my father's presence. And so I invite all of you. I've done this actually while working with the dying and end of life, and they're not even communicating. And I don't think I've shared these stories, but I was working with one individual, and what I do is I look around the room and see what I notice, if there's something they may collect, or is there something, a picture on the wall. So in this one instance, this woman had a beautiful vase of sunflowers. And so I thought, well, that's interesting. And so about 3 days later, I was walking into King Soopers, and there was this giant display of sunflowers. And so I just, in that moment, gave gratitude to this woman. I don't even know her name. It was a inpatient unit down there in Colorado Springs. And so it was confirmation that she had, for me, that she had gotten to the other side. I had another situation where I worked with an inpatient unit, a gal in an inpatient, and they had no idea why she was hanging on. So I went in and I did the chakra spread, and I will intuitively communicate with them, trusting that the information I'm getting is what I'm supposed to hear. And this woman was so scared because there was a young child involved and she didn't know what was going to happen to this child. It turns out it was her sister's child, a niece. And so she was concerned about this niece. And so I was helping her to know that where she is in this moment, she's not able to offer any support to this, her family, to her mother, to her sister. And I said, but when you pass over, you will be in all places at all times, right? And you can guide and be a part of your family's lives in a different way, right? And so I asked her if there was a symbol that she wanted to show me that she got to the other side. And she showed me, I see things in my third eye. She showed me an Oreo cookie. Now, she was a rather large African-American woman. And so I wasn't too shocked to see it could be an Oreo cookie. And I love Oreo cookies. And so King Soopers happened to be my space of messages from those that transitioned. And so about 3 days later, I went into King Super and saw the biggest display of Oreo cookies I have ever seen. And I never saw it again. And so I love to ask either intuitively or with a verbal conversations if the person will show me when they are thinking of me or if they're around me. Many people see pennies. My grandmother sends me pennies. I have a grandmother who gives me good parking spaces. That's a good one. And so I encourage you, or maybe some of you have a story that you have a symbolic message that might have been shown to you that you've experienced. And so let me just move to my last slide. So I always like to end with this, a pretty picture. And this I actually took, it's a picture of Garden of the Gods. I think it is the Kissing Camels. Maybe somebody can correct me, but I think that's the Kissing Camels. And I found this quote from Dolly Parton. And it's the way I see it. If you want the rainbow, you got to put up with the rain. And so I really did. I had a lot of storms with my father, a lot. More storms than rainbows. But man, at the end, he gifted me a pretty spectacular rainbow. So anyway, does anyone, thank you. I'm going to stop sharing. Does anyone have a story or anything that they have experienced?
Can you hear me okay? I have my laptop. It's a little bit sketchy on the, can you see it okay?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I don't know if I can do the video. That might be too bright. Let me just try that. Whoops. Yeah, too much light. Sorry about that. So a friend of mine was talking one time about messages from the deceased. And I have seen in people that are close to me, things like butterflies or a flower. And in the moment, you just know, and it's very clear. And then my husband's ex-wife had dimes. And he said for a long, long time, dimes would be around. That was kind of her symbol. And every once in a while, I'll find dimes, as I'm vacuuming. And I'll say, hi, how you doing? I'll let Jerry know, kind of thing. So just And this information was amazing. Thank you, because I'm hearing a great detail in depth of what you can do during the ritual process of dying. It's wonderful you were there and able to do that. That is definitely a gift.
And it is like, it is a fingerprint. Every situation is going to be different. My story with my father may not compare to anybody else in this lifetime or any other lifetime, right? And it really is about how to hold a real grounded presence and identifying. And here was the greatest lesson my dad really taught me too. He wanted to be in control. And every time I tried to maneuver that or shift that, it caused nothing but issues within him and within our relationship. And I had to stand back, and this is where it gets hard. I had to stand back and watch him fall. I had to watch him cry. I had to watch him be frustrated, right? Because he was losing. The only reason my father turned his car keys in is because he killed the refrigerator in a garage. He drove into it. And so like he held on to life, just clutching it and didn't want to go. And I think that's what was so shocking when I was able to experience the last breaths, because he wanted to control that. And I absolutely believe he did at the very end and allowed me to witness that special. Not many people get to be in that moment when you see someone at the threshold and cross the veil. It is a true gift, and you're called in this work to stand there and feel honored to be able to hold that container for someone. And I was, it was a blessing and a curse to be.
Melinda, I was really touched because the way you use the art to illustrate your experience at the very end. We imagine that it's the person who's dying, who's dropping the suitcase and letting go. And they are.
Mm-hmm.
But for you to be able to say, it was my experience, and I let go of all this longing and yearning and wounding.
Mm-hmm.
The relationship with my father, the lack thereof, that is so beautiful.
And I felt it, Marcia. I can't even explain it. Like the coat, the heavy coat, it was as if the weight of the relationship left with my dad's soul. Like he just kind of took it with him.
Yes.
It was extraordinary.
Do you suppose it was a mutual experience? That he was also dropping the suitcase and the layers?
That's an interesting thought. I'm going to think about that.
Yeah, you were so tight. Your energies were so woven at that point.
Yeah, I'm going to have.
You had been in his energy field.
Yeah.
And I'm going to feed into that a little bit. The fact that at the end, he allowed you to do that. You talked about opening the chakras, opening the portal, and he had peace on his face. It doesn't fit a man who wants to control every second. So I'm thinking there was this tremendous healing, this tremendous exchange on a very subtle level and not so subtle, because you could see it on his face. And you said you saw it later too, that peacefulness, that last breath that he gave you in calm. It wasn't this agony of death. Nope. So, and that image showed me a lot of healing from what you described about him, just from the outside looking at the process, just for you to see it through my eyes, how I'm experiencing that right now. So just, I think that kind of feeds and supports what Marcia might be hinting at.
I want to thank you. That feels amazing, because we underestimate what's happening with the dying at that, right, in that moment. And I wouldn't doubt my father let go of a lot of burdens. I was never shy about sharing my feelings. You know, I'm a Pisces. I'm the most emotionally kind of person that you will find, right? It's just who I am. And so I love the idea that my father in that moment, and I knew he gifted me that. And I didn't really think about him releasing his own baggage. I really need to honor that, because he did.
Mhm.
He was that image as well. We kind of walked that image together, for sure.
Beautiful.
Well, I would like to share. I have, first of all, Melinda, it has been about a year since my dear friend and Marcia's Terrell passed away. And I can't, well, I was going to say I can't thank you enough, but I'm going to thank you so much, and anybody listening to this too, for how you contributed to her passing from a distance. There were probably 3 calls I made to you. She was at home, and the end of her life accelerated pretty fast. There were friends around, and I didn't know what to do. So I would call Melinda and say, what can we do? How can we support her? And you were so beautiful in communicating to me and to us about how to do in the best way we could some of these processes, and you holding that space too. One was the one of the chakras, and your presence and your wisdom and your just willingness to show up meant so much to me. And I'm thinking of Terrell now because it's been about a year.
It has
Been a year. It's been about a year, and so she's very much on my heart.
Oh,
And so thank you so much. The work you do is just absolutely exquisite, and I feel really teary right now. One about your story, and it brings up for me the passing of my father, which was about 3 or 4 years ago. He passed at 100. And unlike your relationship with your father, I was blessed to, for the most part, have a father who was pretty much emotionally available and had a great sense of humor and was pretty, I think, open to passing. But the last 2 weeks of his life, myself and my sisters, so his 4 daughters, were there. He was in a hospital bed. His wife, who was the same age, he remarried after my mom died. So his wife, he picked a young wife, was the same age as us.
wow.
His daughters. And she was able to keep him at home, which was such a blessing. So at the end of his life, he was in a hospital bed at the end of their bed. We would sing to him, okay, and he became non-communicative, you know, in the days preceding his passing. But this was such a profound memory. At one point, my sisters and I went in. Actually, it was the 12 hours before he actually passed, and he had not communicated for days. And we surrounded his bed and we sang this song, and you may know this song about let there be peace on earth, let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. And when we got to the point of the song, and let it begin with me, he raised his arm. He hadn't communicated for days or moved. He raised his arm like that. I was like, oh my gosh. We all went to bed and got a call in the middle of the night. He had passed. But that was such a beautiful memory. Such a beautiful memory. It was kind of like his bye-bye. Okay. And oh my goodness, I'm so touched by your sharing and my memories of him and the exquisiteness of this this time of this profound time of passing. I'll never forget. I was so blessed that I was there in those days.
I really think my father is working on the other side to kind of support, not control my life here, but I want to say to try to support. When I moved back here, I was trying to find work because it was just time for me to kind of get back into the work field and, you know, just sharpen the pencils a bit more. And I mean, for a solid year, I was sending out applications and, you know, to different hospices. People weren't even acknowledging me. And I'm like, all right, I am meant to be present to my dad. I'm going to hold this space for him. And I kid you not, Dad died on January 18th. I had my full-time job by February 22nd in hospice. And I honestly felt like my mom was a stay-home mom. She was a professional volunteer, something that I strive to emulate in my life as well. As a matter of fact, I am experiencing many of my mom's patterns, which I am so ready to let go of. And I'm working, I don't want to wait till the 11th hour to finish those lessons. So I'm trying to kind of, you know, release them as I'm working and sharing with my mom. And I feel it was such a divine intervention how I even got this job. It was through my career coach who was working with me during the pandemic to help me create my business as an end-of-life doula. Like I had all my marketing, I had my business plan. I mean, like I went from A to Z in planning my business, and then COVID hit. And so my career coach, it was only supposed to be for about 6 months, but she just kind of fell in love with me. And she's like, Melinda, I just love talking to you. So she continued the relationship. And then one weekend I applied for a volunteer coordinator job. That is my background with Beata Hospice, which is who I'm now working for. And that was a Sunday. That Monday, I got a call from my career coach that she also does placement services. So kind of like temp in a way. So my career coach actually had a relationship with the director of Beata Hospice. And so these two got talking. And so Beata Hospice is like, we're looking for someone, either, you know, an assistant volunteer coordinator or an administrator coordinator to the director. And so my coach literally sold me to Beata. I didn't go through hardly any of the interview process. I had one interview. Next thing you know, I got the higher paying job. And I'm like, Dad, are you really like a part of this? Because it was one thing that I wanted my dad to be proud of, is the fact that I may not have a full-time career like some people do, but I had a career of energy and end of life, and have been building and developing that for many years. And my father just couldn't acknowledge that. He didn't understand it, right? And so I just feel like my dad had a little bit something to do with my getting a professional career. As a matter of fact, I am very hopeful. There is someone very high up in the organization who is an end-of-life doula, and they want to bring doulas to Beata Hospice. I know. I am so excited. Yes. And so they also now know that I'm a certified practitioner. And now Beata has got this kind of language going on among the muckety mucks that they want to bring integrative modalities. And my boss, her name is Amanda. She's like, well, listen, I've hired an end-of-life doula and an energy practitioner. And so I think they're planning, I'm kind of hoping that I will be a full-time paid doula and energy practitioner. And I'm hoping that I'm going to be the pilot, little old me, that brings this information to Beata as an organization. I think they're in 300, I think they have 300 sites all over the country.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, congratulations. Woohoo.
Thank you. And I'm just, I talk to my dad about it. I do. I'm like, you know what, Dad, I get it. I get that you couldn't show me in this lifetime, but it just feels like he's putting a little kind of, I don't know, he's got a little say or a little energy vested in.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think that too, what he couldn't do in the limited consciousness he had in
Yes.
his human life, in this realm, his consciousness is expanded and he is absolutely there supporting you
Yes.
and becoming your greatest self.
That I will not forget that. Thank you.
Mhm.
That is profound. I really do feel that. And it's just, sometimes we just have to hold the intention, right? Hold the love and the energy of those that have passed on, right? My father never meant any ill. He was so confident in who he was and what he did and what he was about. Like, there was no question. And he was loved by his friends, his neighbors, right? He was popular. My father was a good man. He just didn't know how to handle two twins, I have to tell you. And so I am very grateful that I think my dad is on the other side, because I got into this job just through divine intervention.
There you
And
go.
so,
It is, we've had conversations many times about the difficulty of doulas finding a place within the
Yeah.
things as it is.
Uh-huh.
And it has, you along with many other doulas have faced these closed doors. And so the fact that this door has opened and the potential is unlimited, I think you and your dad, you got it going on.
I know, right?
Absolutely.
I do.
Absolutely.
I know. I feel blessed that this is happening. There's something else that's going to pop in.
He's going to be your favorite marketer.
And I'm so hopeful about that, right? It's just, here's the gift to myself, is that I have been able to let go of my lifetime of wanting my dad's approval, is really what I was seeking. I wanted him to approve of me, to be proud of me. And he just didn't know how to express that, right? He didn't know how to show it. To him, right? Women belonged in the home, right? You take care of the kids, you take care of the house. I kind of took on that role in my lifetime, but I shifted that after my kids were grown, right? I wanted to kind of expand and become more of a professional contributor to my world, whatever that is, whatever that was going to look like. And so I agree, Marcia, the doula world has been affected, like many of us. But I get calls constantly that people, they've been called to this work and they just don't know how to get any traction in the field of being a doula. And I keep hearing and listening and hoping. That's why I hired a career coach to see if I could bring different language. And one of the things my father talked about was, we don't talk about death. So how do we speak about death without actually using the language? And that was something that I even thought about renaming death doula, right? Because people, here's what and Marcia, you and I talked about this. Energy follows intention. When we talk about something, we are inviting that into our space. And I think this is why those that are afraid of death or afraid of the unknown of death, they don't want to talk about it because they're going to bring that in sooner rather than later. And that was my dad in a nutshell, right? If he spoke about it, he was going to invite that into his life, and he didn't want to do that. And so I now can kind of see a huge community of individuals who are unable to talk about what is, how death could be for them, or what that might look like for them.
Okay, cool.
Right?
Mhm.
So
So it's an ongoing field, never ending, because consciousness is never ending.
yeah,
We're so grateful for you to be with us today. Let's just see if there's any more thoughts before we close.
Just thank you. Thank you. Good to see you, Melinda.
thank you. Thank you for having me, truly.
Thank you so much. We are really, really appreciating.
Oh, yes,
May this bless many just to hear your story, and may it
absolutely.
continue to be shared.
You know, it's a whole new umbrella, parenting, you know, being a doula for your parents. It's a
It is.
Yeah.
brand new conversation.
Honor.
It's
Huge.
a specialty in the doula world that probably gets to be explored more.
Yeah.
Because it's probably the most difficult.
It is the most difficult.
All right, everyone. We're so
Enjoy
happy
your
to
summer.
enjoy your summer. Blessings.
Thank you, Melinda.
Thank you, guys.
Keep up the great work.
Great
I'll
work.
keep you posted.
All right. Excellent.
All
Bye,
right.
everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Marcia. I'm going to call you shortly in about a few weeks.